On one of the first meditation retreats that Emily and I did together, she got a really good piece of advice from one of the teachers there. And during that retreat, she was going through a phase of practice where there was a lot of fear in her experience. She was striving to get somewhere. She was trying to control things. And overall, she was having a kind of difficult time. So she went into a practice interview with one of the teachers, a woman named Anna Douglas, and shared what was going on in her practice, what she was experiencing, how things were going, the challenges, the difficulties. And what Anna said to her was very simple. She said, "You don't do the practice does you." And this had a really big impact on her practice. It was exactly what she needed to hear at that point. And it's something that I've been contemplating a lot in terms of the phases of practice that we all go through. So what does it mean to let the practice do you? And how is that also different from just giving up on the practice or letting things fall by the wayside? There's a distinction there that's really important. So one way to kind of talk about this is to think about the escape velocity that's needed to be able to gain a certain amount of momentum in our practice for it to begin to carry us. And escape velocity is a term in physics that's used just to describe the amount of speed that's needed to escape the gravity well of a massive object like a planet or a star. And so this is a really good analogy, I think, for also what's needed in meditation practice, because in the beginning, we need a large amount of effort, of energy, of propulsion, of liftoff to get us going. It's like a rocket lifting off from the Earth. It needs a certain amount of energy to get going to be able to escape the gravity well of Earth. It's got to have that escape velocity. But once we reach a certain point in our practice where there's enough momentum, enough speed to carry us, the practice actually begins to flip. It begins to change in terms of the character of it, in terms of the point of it, in terms of how to actually effectively do it. In the same way that the rocket, which is going off from Earth, eventually escapes the gravity of Earth, then it is carried by its own momentum because it's traveling through an empty vacuum, it's traveling through empty space. There's nothing impeding its movement at that point. In the same way, when we've reached a point in our practice where there's no longer the necessity to put extra effort into it, because we've already reached that point, that critical threshold where we have broken through, then at that point, it really becomes much more about allowing the practice to continue of its own accord. It's actually interesting because at that point, if you're trying to push or strive or put extra effort into the practice, it kind of sends you off course at that point. And the big challenge, once you've kind of gone through that flip, gone past that breakthrough point, achieved that escape velocity, is to move from putting effort in and really being the hardcore meditator to allowing and trusting and surrendering into the process that has been kicked off. Here we're learning to trust the momentum of our practice to carry us. This is what she meant by the practice does you. It does take a certain amount of energy to get going, but once we get going, at that point, it's about letting the movement of mind carry us, letting attention and all the ways we've been training it to continue working on us. It's about trusting that our experience, just as it is, just as it's presenting itself, just as we're knowing it in practice, is sufficient. It's enough. It's about seeing all the ways that we try to manipulate our experience, even though we've sort of seen in a very deep way that we're not in control of what's arising. In a conventional sense, we can influence our experience, of course. But in the deeper meditative sense, any attempt to influence experience is also part of experience. When we have the intention to move our hand, for instance, and grab something to eat, there is the arising of intention, the feeling of about to-ness, and then there's the movement, and then there's the touching, and then there's the moving, and then there's the thinking about how I just moved my hand to grab this apple, for instance. Seen from the kind of meditative point of view, all of those experiences and the arising of them, the sequence of them, can be simply known as part of the chain of what's arising. They can be allowed to occur. We can let them occur without trying to do anything else but notice what's happening. If we do anything else, we notice that we're doing that. And so when Anna said, you don't do the practice does you, she was giving a very timely piece of advice, because at that point, what Emily really needed, and what many of us need as we progress and deepen in our mind training, is to trust, is to allow, is to sense into a deeper kind of intelligence that is rooted in our biologies. It's rooted in the wisdom traditions that we're practicing. It's inherently trustworthy, and it's something that we can allow to unfold and occur in the same way that if you drop a seed and you water it and you plant it, at some point you can just trust that it's going to grow. It's got the intelligence built in, baked into its DNA. In the same way, this process of unfolding, the DNA of it, the spiritual DNA, if you will, is already exactly what it needs to be. We just need to provide the right conditions and then let it happen. And that's a beautiful thing to start to understand, and a beautiful thing when we can start to allow it, because then we don't have to do so much. We can just show up, be present, notice what's arising, and let go.